All right. Okay, everybody's okay there now. Let me just pick up back here. So we're dealing with chapter 3, and chapter 3 outlines the relational leadership model. And to begin any model, we have to start with the definition of what is leadership. And I'm sorry about my dogs. Oh my God. All right, so the definition of leadership in the relational leadership model is leadership is a relational and ethical process of people together working to accomplish some sort of positive change. So they're defining things from a specific context. All right, so the next thing that we talk about here is that the relational leadership model involves the focus on 5 primary components. So the primary components are purpose, inclusivity, empowerment, ethical values, and process-oriented. So the statement that it derives from the RLM model is purposefully built or is purposeful and builds commitment towards positive purposes that are inclusive of people and diverse points of view, empowers those that are involved, is ethical, and recognizes that all 4 of these elements are accomplished by being process-oriented. Okay, so what do you think that means? I mean, the one I want you all to focus on a little bit is process-oriented. Why should this model be process-oriented? And just to help you here, this is a physical representation of the model, a visual representation. Anybody can give me an idea. Why should anything be process-oriented? What do you understand by process orientation? This is your turn to contribute. Yes, Greg.
So I understand that it means being involved in the process and not necessarily the outcome. So the outcome is probably just as valuable as the process, and it means that while you're going through that process, you need to have all the other values like being ethical and empowering others and having a purpose.
All right. But the concept of, all right. Greg, do you bake? Do you cook?
Not not really.
Yeah. All right. Give me something that you're good at, that you think you're good at.
So I would say I get at school.
Okay. So I wanted something a little more
So
physical.
you could use the cooking example.
Do you cook at all?
Yes, I cook from time to time.
Okay. All right. Now, whenever you're cooking a particular dish, what do you follow to be able to get the dish prepared? What is something you when you do cook that you like to
Mm.
cook or you don't like cooking?
The recipe is important.
The what? Sorry.
The recipe and what goes into it. The
And
pro-
what is a recipe? What is a recipe technically speaking?
the recipe shows exactly how to prepare the dish and what to put into it and how much of each item to put into it.
Good. So another phrase we could use or word we can use for a recipe is an algorithm, right? Do you understand what an algorithm is?
Yes, sir.
Right. So why follow the algorithm? And what's the function of having an algorithm or process?
Important for the outcome because you can't just do any old thing and expect to end up with the dish that you
I
want.
agree. So the idea is that at the end of the day, regardless of who's involved with the process, involved with the cooking, if we follow the same process, we're likely to get similar results every time we get into that, every time we cook, right? That makes sense?
Yes, sir.
Tiffany, welcome. And that's the reason why we have processes put in place. So anything that you do, um, that you get involved with, what you find happening is that oftentimes, if we use a process approach, it means that we're able to repeat the event from one time to the next. So it's one of the reasons why um, in teaching, for example, we go through particular methods following a process so that we can repeat the outcome, or we can begin to predict what the outcome is likely to be once we follow this particular process. That makes sense, guys? Yes?
Yes, sir.
No? All right. Okay, Greg seems to be the only person contributing. All right, so let's start to look at um, a little more. Well, of course, this chapter is about detailing this relational model. All right, so it doesn't seek to describe the way leadership is currently practiced, but it is trying to give us a model to which we can try to aspire towards. Now, and this is a kind of like important for us to remember. The model that we're looking at here is a utopia. So it's what we'd like to see. So we don't expect that we're going to see this type of leadership in actual existence, but it sets a standard against which we can measure reality, which is the nature of most theory, especially in social sciences. Theories tend to present an ideal to which we can aspire towards achieving. And then when we measure reality to it, we can kind of measure and see how far away from that aspiration we're looking at, or from that model that we're looking at. All right, so let's look at the purpose. Now, the purpose is critical for anything. And one of the groups is going to be dealing with the power of vision and goals and mission statements. Purpose is the driving force behind anything that you get involved with. And it's, the same thing is very important here. The leadership model here is vision driven and not position driven, which means that anybody could be in that position of leadership, because it wouldn't matter if that person changes, so that the vision is drives the objectives of the organization, or the objectives of the group, or the leadership, because we agree that this is the vision that we have, that we all want to accomplish, and it's not going to be dependent upon, so heavily dependent upon the person in leadership position. So for example, I don't know if you all are aware of this, but we have a new president. The college has a new president. Dr. Paul has retired, and there's a new president who's just been appointed to the board. You all know that, right? You all familiar with that? You all got that notification? You
Yes.
all
Afraid
don't
not.
know that?
No. Nope.
You're not? All right, so maybe I can help you all. See if I have it here. So this gentleman here is now the new, see if I could make this any bigger. All right, so maybe you all can see it now a little better. Dr. Keith Nurse is now the new president of the college. Now, he's coming from a different background that Dr. Paul came from. All right, and therefore one of the challenges that any organization experiences when a significant leadership position changes in the organization is that it can in fact begin to change its direction. Now, how many of you all are aware of the college's vision and mission statement? I guess not. All right, Greg, again, you seem to be the one contributing. Go ahead.
So that they aim to provide affordable and accessible education to diverse communities.
Huh?
Yeah, that's the
Where,
part. No.
yeah, where can we find that? If we go to the college's website,
Yeah.
where can we find that here?
So I just honestly
Sir,
Googled it.
sir is not in About Us.
Should it?
I think it should be in there.
It should. Okay, all right. Who are we? Let's look and see if we get that information from here. I don't see anything about it. You seeing anything? Yeah, it's generally going to be here though. I'll just let you all know. In your website or about the college is going to be where you're going to find the information about the college's website and that kind of stuff. But if you paid attention to the documents that were loaded, let's look at something here. We have somebody's cameras on, Mr. Charles. Right, good. If you go to the course outline, which is kind of weird. Where is it? I don't have it here. Interesting. It's on the website, on the e-classroom. How many of you all well, some people would have downloaded the course outline, that PDF document. Right at the top of every course outline, we've placed the vision and mission statement for you. How many of you all are aware of this?
Sir, I see it, but I don't read it. I just go
So
to
let's look at the vision here. Let's primarily look at to be a student-centered, dynamic, and innovative world-class and multi-campus college, promoting excellence in teaching and learning, serving diverse communities, and producing lifelong learners who can compete globally. Right? That's the vision statement. So when the college, the president of the college comes into the organization now, what's going to happen is that he has to set it up in such a way that he's going to be driven, hopefully, and we'll see, by the vision of the organization. Because we didn't arrive at that vision hairy-fairy. He may engage, however, in some sort of revisionary exercise about the vision of the college and so on. Why? Because the vision and mission statement that you see there was generated in the early 2000s, when the college first started in the year 2000, because it was incorporated in the year 2000. But the vision and mission statement was created in the late 1990s, between 98 and 99, around there, just before the millennium issues that we faced. So obviously, it might be time for us to revise the vision statement of the college, but the vision statement gives a documented vision for the organization to be driven from. And the importance of it is because in the absence of the leaders that were there during that time, the vision stays consistent and constant. And that's one of the things about the relational leadership model. It's vision driven and not position driven. Why? Because when you have change taking place in the organization, the vision is what drives the organizational's behavior, and it is not driven by the person who sits in the office. Now, how many of you all have ever experienced a change in leadership in your organization, or a change of the individual that you're working under? And has it changed the way in which things are done, or has it changed what you're doing basically? That's the whole concept that I'm trying to get to. Anybody experience anything like that? No?
No, not particularly.
Not particularly. All right. So generally what you want to pay attention to is whether or not when somebody new comes into an organization, whether or not the person affects, where is it? All right, whether or not the person affects what happens or whether the person adapts to the organization. All right. And that's what the model is talking about. The purpose is what drives us, not the individual, because the value systems that people come to an organization with tend to vary over time or vary between individuals. But if the organization is driven by ethical values, ethics and values that are entrenched in their vision, then it should not change. There will be some impact, however, when you have strong personalities coming into an organization like that. All right, so individuals in the leadership process need to know themselves well before they can effectively work with others to influence the change. Now, so once you know the purpose of the organization, you need to know yourself well. So that brings us back to the knowing, being, doing model that was spoken about. Process calls for the engagement to be knowledgeable about yourself, to be aware of self and others. That's the being part, and to act accordingly. All right, that's the three-part knowing, being, doing model that we identified in the first chapter that it referred to it in terms of moving there. All right, so they are interrelated because knowledge you possess influences the way you think, which then influences your actions, and the beliefs that you hold will influence your behaviors. So that whole circular pattern of behavior, knowing, being, doing is like eat, pray. What was it? Eat, pray, love. You all remember that movie?
I don't remember the movie, but God knows I remember all the what is all those posters.
Right, eat, pray. Right, because what it's talking about there is a cyclical effect of the influence of the knowing, being, doing, working on your your leadership potential in organizations and how you behave. But again, you have to remember first and foremost, the the organization or the activity you're dealing with is vision driven, not individually driven. All right. But you have to now fit yourself within the organization, knowing that there is a vision that you have to accomplish. Now, that leads to some issues that we're going to be dealing with that come up. But taking this knowing, being, doing, another author refers to it as head, heart, and practice. So a head, your intelligence, your heart, which refers to your values and stuff, and then your practice is what you end up doing from it. So that basically the if we believe that logic is the only thing that drives our behavior or should be what drives what happens in your organization, and as I said, you keep it separate from your heart, which is the being aspect, it then further separates us from the practice of doing. So you have to believe, in essence, what they're saying here, as a leader, you need to believe in what you are engaging in. And the three go together, and for you to be effective. Because if you are leading an organization and you don't agree with its vision, you don't agree with its behavioral practices or its ethical practices or general practices, which impacts upon your thing, there's a disconnect. The authors speak about cognitive dissonance. Many of you all came across that statement before, cognitive dissonance.
Yes, sir.
and that cognitive dissonance creates issues. Have you ever worked in an organization or worked in a group in which there was the function and behaviors of expected behavior in the organization do not hold with your personal beliefs?
I think so, yeah.
Yes,
Right.
sir.
And
Yeah.
what, right? Would you be able to describe how you felt in that organization when you worked there? I think it was, go ahead.
Sir,
Uh-huh.
I felt frustrated. I I felt like um I'm being ignored.
So
It
you
was
tried to
really
tell them
frustrating.
that, yeah? And what ended up happening eventually?
Sir, I left.
And generally, that's one of the options that is available to individuals when they are confronted with a situation in which you experience that cognitive dissonance. And one of the options is to leave the organization if you can't reconcile your value structure, your heart, with the goals and organizational behaviors of the organization. And that's because, again, if you stayed in a situation like that, where you felt like you didn't have a choice, but you had to do what they said, then you're going to likely experience that cognitive dissonance. And a lot of people get sick in jobs like that. They will have lots of problems with dealing with organizations like that. And a lot of people, when they find themselves in an organization like that, they get ill, they don't have a good time, they start having other issues and problems the in their lives, because they feel like, they're out of touch with everything. And it's generally a very scary and unhealthy environment for people to operate in. All right, knowing, being, doing. People will collaborate with people who are credible, those who are knowing what they're doing. Leaders need to demonstrate competence and maintain a certain amount of knowledge. So we call this uh, responsible knowledge or responsible information. So if you are going into an organization or into an operation or activity and you have no clue about what you're doing, or about the content of, or the activities you're getting involved with, do you think you'd be a good leader in an organization like that or in a situation like that? So let's paint an example that you're in a situation where you are running an organization that repairs vehicles, and you don't know anything about a vehicle in terms of its repairing and designing and repair and stuff like that. Do you think you would be looked upon as being knowledgeable or competent in the area by the other people who work with you?
No, sir. No, sir.
Back in the day, a lot of corporate organizations would hire CEOs who were marketing intensive in terms of their knowledge base, but had very limited knowledge about their product lines. And they would allow these people to run the organization. And it led to a huge disconnection between what was happening in the organization and what the leadership was doing. You all looked at that film called Ferrari versus Ford, I think it was. You all looked at that film? Any of you all?
Yes, sir.
Right.
I saw it.
Did you recall the for the person who looked at it, the marketing guy getting into these arguments with the designer of the vehicle, the builder and designer and driver?
I think so, yeah.
No, I
Yeah,
can't remember that.
But he would always get in they wanted all the vehicles to come in when they were doing the Le Mans race. They wanted all the vehicles to come in Altogether, what was it? They wanted all of them to finish first, now, basically. And the decision was being made by the management of the Ford company for that to happen, whereas the drivers knew it was supposed to be a competitive issue that was going on. That would have indicated which model was behaving or being best in the thing. So the idea here now is the concept that was driven home there was that the person who was leading the organization was not knowledgeable about the vehicles and what they were doing. They didn't really care about the vehicles and that kind of stuff. All they cared about was making money. They just wanted to lead the world in terms of making money and from cars. They couldn't care less about building vehicles and that type of stuff. So that shows a disconnect between the leadership of the organization and the activities, the key activities or products that they produce. And that creates a big problem, because can you trust a leader who doesn't know the product that you're dealing with or the service that you're dealing with? And that's what they're talking about here. People will be willing to work with you if they view you as being credible, if you know what you're talking about. And that's from both sides of the coin. That makes sense? That's the image that they're talking about. So there are four levels of skills that the model says that are really important in interpersonal skills. That is the ability for you to develop effective communication and relationships between people. Conceptual skills, the ability to think creatively, which means it has to be driven by the technical skills that you are required to have for the organization. And of course, you have to have tactical skills. Those are your skills at negotiation, dealing with human relation issues, and any of the other skills or soft skills that are required for you to be able to get the business of the organization done, which could be amount to a lot of things. It depends upon the organization that you're working with, the kind of technical and tactical skills you're going to require. But negotiation and dealing with human relations is going to be one of those critical ones. And a lot of people who come from technical backgrounds struggle with tactical and interpersonal skills because they simply never really had to deal with this, especially in organizations that are technologically driven. So if you looked at if you looked at that film on social networking with Facebook and how they came up, one of the biggest issues that you're going to see, there's a disconnect between the two main guys who were involved in that whole story. Was one person had the intellectual and one person had the technical and intellectual skills, and the other person had the interpersonal and tactical skills, and then one betrayed the other. You all remember that, right? You all ever saw that movie, Social Networking, or The Social Network?
No, but I've seen enough.
Yeah, but if you
isn't that the one with Mark Zuckerberg?
Yes, the movie about Mark Zuckerberg and the original person that was with him as his partner in the business development.
I never saw it as yet.
Well, look at it. You could probably get it on
It's probably on Netflix, I think, or HBO.
Yeah, it might be one of them, or Hulu or one of them you could look at. But the whole concept about that is that where there's a disconnection between these skills, there's usually going to create gaps, and those gaps start to create problems. All right. And it affects people's ability to trust you, because having technology, even if you looked at the movie they did about Steve Jobs, you'd recognize that from a technical aspect, they were really, really good in terms of conceptualizing and developing technology. But they had really poor people skills. They didn't know how to speak to people, how to work with people. They were uncouth in some of the behaviors that they got into. And in fact, a lot of people talked about Steve Jobs as being this great person who developed and forward thinking and developmental and stuff. Even Gates as well. They all speak to them as being these really great technical people, but when it came to their people skills, they were looked upon as being very poor in their people skills, as opposed to somebody like Bronson from Virgin Records or Virgin Airlines and stuff like that, who wasn't so much of a highly technical individual, but was more along the lines of he was able to welcome back, Camille. He was able to develop better relationships, and therefore he's had better types of he has better relationships with his workers, and therefore he gets going well. He's able to recover from failure and keep on going from that way. So again, this is not something that you come preloaded with. It's something that you're going to have to learn and grow with, because you don't come with everything. You're not like a computer program with all of these skills. You're going to have to learn them along the way. So it's not the expectation that you have to have all 4 of these skills, in your arsenal, ready to crack as soon as you start. But along the way, you can help develop those skills as you're moving up, as you're moving through the organization. The being means knowing that what values and attributes define you as a leader. What is your character like? So again, what is important to you? What is the most critical thing for you? If you're running an organization and money is the profit, is the critical determinant factor, then your behaviors are going to begin to reflect those values. And those values will begin to permeate the organization, because that is going to be what, at the end of the day, what your function is going to be. So if you're running down money, you're going to be cutting costs to be able to produce those goods and services that you want to produce at any expense. And you don't really care about anything else besides how can I produce this good with the most amount of profit, with the least amount of cost. And in order to do that, in some instances, you start to take shortcuts that start to be negative. So again, if we look at Brockovich, Erin Brockovich, you all remember that movie? No?
Afraid not to, no.
All right, so Erin Brockovich was a movie based upon a true event in which a company was dumping its waste into the environment around them and polluting the water, causing people in the area around their thing to get into trouble, and they started to get sick and die from cancer and whatnot, various forms of cancer. And the company knew what was going on. It's sort of like another movie you could look at in relation to this whole concept of the disconnect between the being and your doing action is the Philip Morris company, the one with the whistleblower, where the cigarette companies knew that nicotine was addictive and that it was cancer causing, but didn't care. In fact, they would manipulate the nicotine levels to try and make it even more addictive, to ensure that they would have new customers, and they would always have customers for their products, because they knew and they know, even to this day, Philip Morrison, for example, Philip Morris, not Morrison, I think, they know that their population is a dying population, because eventually cigarettes will kill you. But they need to recruit new people into smoking to be able to ensure that they had survival in the future. Now, and the thing about it is that in the Whistleblower, again, y'all ever saw that movie, The Whistleblower? Russell Crowe played the lead in that film, and again, it was based upon a true story, like Erin Brockovich. The Whistleblower was also in relation to that as well. A lot of films illustrate the disconnect between the ethical values or the impact of where your value system affects your behavior in an organization, because it starts to reflect what is the most critical thing for you. If the most critical thing for you is going to be making the most amount of profit and maximizing your profits, then you don't care what happens to your consumers, to your customers, that type of stuff. And that kind of behavior is something that is critical in terms of leadership, because the leadership will guide an organization through their actions to be able to give results to that particular thing. All right. So, all right. So we have the knowing, the being. The doing of knowing and being means acting. Character, knowledge are not enough. Facilitating change in leadership process. The doing attempts to produce results, accomplishes the vision, creates the change, and influences others to act. So the knowing, the being, those are the parts that we just talked about there. The doing part is where you actually act upon what you know to be true. And again, if you follow through the example I've been looking at, in those companies that were behaving in a non-ethical manner, they were really driven not by any ethical values, but by value systems where they were simply looking at the welcome, Mr. Ed, Elijah.
Hi, sir. Sorry for being late.
That's all right. That's all right. I understand things are not going to work out the way you always want them to. So the what was I saying? All right. So the behaviors, the doing element would act accordingly then, basically. So how do you want to behave? So you have to act on your behavior. So when we talked about that cognitive dissonance that we spoke about before, where you're working in organizations that the value structure was profit oriented, so all they cared about was making money. So what the doing part of it would reflect what that vision and what those values were. So there would be a lot of disregard, for example, for the experience of their consumers and the people working in the organization as well, unfortunately, in relation to how you were going to get that done. Because it meant that you would force people to act in particular ways, which is one of the reasons why when you have leadership that's driven by superficial concepts and questionable, or what we call morally ambiguous visions or guidance, so you're in morally ambiguous um, organization, it leads to that disconnect, and you tend to hurt a lot of people around you because you know what you're doing is wrong, but you're forcing people to act accordingly, and that is probably what I think Aaliyah, you were talking about that. No, we have two Aaliyahs, so I think it was Aaliyah Rodney that was talking about working in an organization where um, they felt that level of cognitive dissonance that they were experiencing, which is why sometimes people would leave an organization because they simply don't like that, don't like what they're doing in terms of that. A lot of people who operate in national security, for example, not saying that this is our experience here, start to think about it. Now, I've taught a lot of students from national security, and they always speak about the culture of the organization impacting upon the decisions or the behaviors that they've been asked to work with. So you have systemic issues that face the organization that force types of behaviors that many people don't agree with. And a lot of it has to do with feeling almost as if the organization, is driving them into behaviors that they don't see as being good for everybody. So morally ambiguous type of things. So why that happens? Well, because organizations get lost. Sometimes they don't update their thinking, or they're using or they're led by somebody who's indecisive, or they have a fixation on perfection. I've worked with people like that, in leaders who would not make decisions. I've worked under people like that, and I've also worked with people who have a fixation on getting things done right. And that's frustrating, because unless you try, so let's put it in this context. I worked in an organization where the person refused to do anything because they were waiting to get everything lined up and put in place. And they were simply unwilling to make an attempt at getting something done without having everything in place at the time that you wanted to do it. And that led to a stagnation of the organization. We just didn't do anything. You just kind of stopped, and you're kind of just waiting. And it was primarily not because of a decision, but because of a fixation on perfection. Have any of you all ever found yourselves like this? That you want to do something, but you're waiting for the perfect setup for it, and you're just unwilling to try things?
Yes.
Yes,
Sir.
sir.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's happened.
You understand how debilitating that would be if you're working with somebody else and they want to try things and see if it works, and you're saying, no, we have to wait until we get this, and we have to wait until we get that, and there's no trial and error that you're allowing. This is when you're working in organizations that have zero tolerance for mistakes, and making mistakes means you don't take a chance. It's sort of like, if you think about relationships, you don't want to get hurt, so therefore you don't take a chance on telling people you like them. There are people who run their lives like that, right? You know that, right? They simply don't get involved in relationships because they don't want to get hurt. I hope none of you all live your life like that, huh? Getting hurt is probably the #1 way to learn. All right. Okay, so learning is an outcome of the knowing, being, doing developmental model or feedback system. So basically what they're talking about here, the only way you're going to be able to learn is by doing things and finding out what's happening. So leaders must promote learning through their own action of learning, helping others to learn, and by shaping and contributing a culture that promotes learning. So that learning model that we talked about, that we want to learn together. So not only are we going to be attempting things and learning from our trial and error, but we, as a leader, you want to create an environment in which learning is something that is valued by you and by the organization. And if you've ever worked in a zero tolerance organization where you can't do things unless you get it done right, then like for instance, banking is like that. Banking, anybody here works in a bank?
No, I don't.
And what about accounting? Anything to do with money? Generally, the system operates in a system of you better get it right the first time, because if you get it wrong, but the good thing about it though is that they put checks and balances in place where if you do get it wrong at some stage, you're able to address it. And if you're working in an environment like that, it kind of creates that problem of being ridiculed by the errors that you make more than anything else. In fact, that's the only time some bosses actually you hear from them, is when something goes wrong, then you hear from the boss. But all the time you're doing everything correctly, You know, you ever had that kind of situation where you're in a classroom, for example, and the only time a teacher calls upon you is when you do something wrong? Have you ever been in situations like that? So you basically what they call make out in a classroom or make out in a situation because you did something wrong, and that's the only time you get called upon. It's sort of like almost like parenting. Yeah? Parents pay more attention to a child when they do the wrong thing, and don't really pay a lot of attention to them when they do the right thing, because they simply just want you to just ease their passage through things. You'll ever get that feeling with some parents or some teachers that they only pay attention, or they pay attention more when you do the wrong thing? No? Ever came across the theory of the soggy potato chip?
I
Any of
think
you?
so. I think so.
Yep.
I
What is it?
I don't know. Oh, well, like I don't know. Like I've heard. So I think I've heard it like once or twice, but I know that nobody likes soggy potato chips though. So
Right, but if there are no other potato chips,
I'm not gonna
you
eat it.
you're not getting it?
I'm not
No,
gonna eat the
think about
soggy
it.
potato chip.
Yeah, but the whole point about it is that the theory of soggy potato chips really is about, it's a concept. The idea is children in particular want attention. And if the only attention that they can get is when you punish them, because you don't pay attention to them otherwise, then they're going to behave badly. It's called the theory of the soggy potato chip.
Oh,
You understand?
okay, right.
Because you want love and affection. Remember, human beings are social animals. We seek relationships. We seek confirmation of we're doing the right thing. We want to feel loved. Those higher level hierarchical needs and wants. What's the highest one? Self-actualization.
Yeah,
You all know that model? Whose model is
yeah.
that?
It was a
Maslow.
hierarchy of like various basic needs.
Right, hierarchy of needs, right? The
Yeah,
Maslow's model. Somebody mentioned the name, I think. I didn't see who it was.
Yeah.
That hierarchy of needs speaks to not just simply getting food, clothing, and shelter, which we call basic economic needs for survival. But we're talking about higher level needs of procreation, of satisfaction, socialization, feeling love and affection, and self-actualization, feeling special. If a child is having trouble engaging with parents in particular, and they're not getting attention, they will behave badly because of that whole concept. They call it the soggy potato chip. You're going to behave badly because that's the only time you get attention. And it happens in families in particular, in which there are multiple children at varying age levels, where they're competing for the attention of their parents. Because the person who is going to get the most amount of attention will be the one who behaves the worst. Because your parents had to be running out behind you, well, and beating you and cutting your ass and that kind of thing. Basically along those lines. You all follow what I'm talking about there, right?
yeah.
All right. So relational leadership model is purposeful, meaning that it's driven by its function, its purpose. All right. And in order for us to develop a shared idea of purpose, it means that we have to work together and pull everybody's vision together to be able to drive towards that. Now, it means that we have to agree that we want to share that particular vision. Now, that is part of a lot of times that's part of a problem that people face. Terry, you left your mic on.
Oh,
Um, you, one of the challenges that most leaders in organizations in particular have to deal with is, especially in organizations going through periods of change, is how do I get everybody to agree to the vision that we are looking towards achieving? And the concept is really going to be, it involves a lot of work to get people to develop that common ground necessary for us to say, okay, I agree with this vision, I agree with this purpose, and therefore, you know, we may have problems about how we get to that vision, but we have general agreement that this is what we want. But if you have disagreement about what we want to get, what vision we expect to find, or where we want to find ourselves in the future, that's where the problem is going to come up. So, for example, how many of you all participate in church groups or choirs or something along those lines? Ever did any sort of youth activity or groups? Anybody?
I have before, sir, but not recently.
Right, but I'm talking in your past. Have you encountered issues where there was no understanding of that vision that you all had for what was going on in the group at that point in time? Generally, there's a priest assigned to it, or some authority from the church that you're working with that helps to kind of streamline what's happening. Some sort of church leader or church connection. Elijah?
Yes, I get. I don't really understand what
All
you
right, so let's say you're in a youth group and y'all are planning for a concert. All right? Was there a meeting that determined what the concert will be, how it'll be, that kind of stuff? Is there a commonality in the vision? Now, it's a kind of really simplified activity that I'm talking about here because it's like a project, basically. If we all agree on what at the end of the day, what will be going on with the concert, then we should be able to work towards that, resolving all the issues that will come up, because issues will come up, and we will work collectively to be able to get to that point. But if we have a problem with the way in which the concert is going to be done or going to be run, then we're going to have a problem with the vision. That means that we didn't get a shared vision going, and the importance of it is critical, because if we are not seeing things the same way, we're not seeing the same vision, then we will be at odds ends with each other, because we are seeing two different things or different things altogether, and we're not dealing, or we're not developing common ground. And that means that our actions are probably going to be non-productive towards the accomplishment of a particular vision, because there are too many different concepts going on out there. Now, I'll let you in some developmental issues. In Costa, one of the biggest issues we had, which led to a lot of conflict in the development of the college at the very beginning, was that there was an issue with the shared vision of the organization. And there were problems in developing that mission and vision statement because they again, there were different value structures that were driving the behaviors of the various players in the organization. Each one wanted their particular, each organization wanted their particular preeminence in the organization. And they were unwilling to listen to criticisms of their own personal issues from an institutional point of view. So I remember I worked at John Donaldson Technical when we first started. You're familiar with that institution, right, John D? Some of you, especially in the East. Anyway, so John D ran with something called the NEC program. The NEC is the National Examinations Council. And they developed the technicians, craftsmen, and various diploma programs that people can do. I taught in a number of those different programs. And one of the issues that came up with that program was that the failure rate was extremely high. Now, why was the failure rate for the programs high? Was because you would not get a full certificate, and the full certificate was not transferable if you failed one module. So consider, for example, you're doing a bachelor's degree, right? or an associate degree. And you did all of these courses and you failed one of the courses. Generally, now what we do is you just repeat it in the next semester. In the other system, if you failed it, you could not repeat it until the course came back around in a year's time. And you had to do it as a part-time student. You couldn't do it as a full-time student. So that the failure rate was relatively high, especially in courses that were giving problems those in particular that gave problems with mathematics. But the college was unwilling to give up the highly structured nature of the way in which it operated the program to become more flexible, because they believed that doing that would impact upon the quality of the qualification, because John Donaldson and San Fernando Technical both ran these NEC programs that they believed were superior programs to others that existed around. And they may have been, and from the position of content and what we were trying to get students to do, but the whole issue was that we weren't willing to listen and make changes because of the shared vision problem that we were having in terms of becoming more student-centered as opposed to institutionally driven. You're following that whole issue? So in order to make any program student-driven or student-focused and learning-centered, that was another thing too, learning-centered. You're familiar with that concept, learning-centered? Again, it comes up from the where is that document? Right, it's here, right? Student-centered. Most of the lecturers in the institutions were having problems agreeing with that concept of student-centeredness. What do you all understand by that term, by the way? Just out of curiosity. Anybody?
So you mean the term student-centered?
Yep, that term student-centered.
Well, it would have to be focused on maybe it would be basically focused around the students and what they want and need. And I imagine that they would also have like a bigger role in dictating a lot of decisions.
Right, in terms of what was done in the class. Now, student-centeredness is in fact a very large problem because, okay, so think of your experience coming through the secondary school system in particular. What is the focus of any teacher from Form 4 to 5? 3, 4, and 5 generally. When you were in class with them, what was the focus of the teacher? They'd always come in and tell you something about it. How many of you all ever got it? We have to finish all the content of the syllabus. And then we have to start tackling past papers. Yes?
Yes, sir.
Right. So what kind of focus is that? We have to engage in an open discussion about it. You don't have to agree with it one way or the other. I just want to get your feelings on it. How many of you all like that system? Greg, go ahead.
I think that's content focused or
Yes, it
outcome
is.
focused.
Right, or exams driven. So what drives our CSEC system and our CAPE system is the exam. You understand? Not the learning, but the result, as Greg talked about. And that is the important switch around. The switch around is if your focus is only on whether or not the student fails or passes a course, then you're not focusing your attention on whether or not the student has understood what they've gone through and has learned what they've gone through. Now, how do you evaluate when a student has actually learned something? Well, generally, most times we evaluate the way whether or not a student understands something is when they can actually put it to use. Now, it might be easier for you to evaluate at a craft level whether or not somebody could perform a task, but performance is sometimes built up into rote behavior. So you're able to copy something and repeat that copying, but did you understand why you were doing what you were doing? You understand? This is what the focal point is. Why do you do things the way you do it? What is the reason why you're doing it this particular way? And that focal point in terms of how teaching is designed is where you become learner focused as opposed to teacher focused. And the vast majority of secondary schools are very teacher focused because it's focused only on what the teacher does and not what the student does. Because at the end of the day, they have to answer this question to their principals and to the curriculum officers and the school supervisors. Did you, not did the students, but did you complete the syllabus? That is always the thing. Did you cover all the work? Not the other important question was, did your students understand and can demonstrate that understanding of whether or not they've learned the content? That was the important part. Because at the end of the day, all you want them to do is to pass an exam. And anybody can pass an exam. All you have to do is to drill into it. But how much have you actually learned? Any ideas? All right, so the way it works is this. In most classes that you engage in, where there's a lot of learning that's taking place, you remember less than 10% of a class that you went through an entire year doing work in. You remember the least amount of what you read, a little more in what was said, and the most in what was done. So what does that speak to in terms of learning preferences? By the way, any of you all did your learning preference evaluation, the VARC system, for those of you who haven't done it in the past? No, you didn't.
Sorry, what was that?
In the e-classroom, I put a link to the VARC learning system thing. And how many of you all tried that? Here, the learning style inventory test.
Oh, I tried both of those.
Right. What was your learning style preference? What was your learning preference?
It was mostly visual and kinetic.
Kinesthetic, right? Okay,
Yeah,
good.
kinesthetic.
Right. Now.
Yeah, visual and kinesthetic.
Right. That means you're going to learn the most from, or your preference in learning would be from what you hear, vocal or verbal, and what you do. But if you only read and listen, read and write, you're not going to be able to remember a lot of what you do. What program are you dealing with? I think it's Terry that's been speaking. Yes, Terry.
Yes. Do you mean like in terms of what degree I'm doing?
Yes.
Bachelor's degree in radiography.
Right. And you know, this is something with radiography. There's a lot to do.
Yeah, it's like lots of medical stuff. Yeah.
Right. So the advice that your learning preference tells you is that in order for you to deal with the complex issues or complex concepts that you're dealing with, is to relate it to some sort of physical activity. Do something while you are trying to absorb that particular type of information. So if a lot of your information that's coming to you is very abstract in nature, it sits in theory and from a textbook or something along those lines. One of the strategies they talk about with somebody who has a preference for kinesthetic learning is to either make audio tapes. If you're, in your case, you're kinesthetic and audio, right? That's what your preference indicated.
It was like kinesthetic and visual.
Right. So kinesthetic and visual means that you need to take concepts and visualize them, meaning take them from off the page and create visual documents or visual like flowcharts and stuff like that to help understand and memorize and recall that information. But you'll learn the most by actually putting it into practice, by actually doing something with it. So it doesn't surprise me, Terry, that you've ended up doing radiography because it has an extremely large physical quotient to it. There's a lot of theory and anatomical knowledge and that type of stuff that goes behind it. But once you can make the link between the concept and a physical activity, then it's easy for you to make that linkage. So you're in a field that works well with the type of qualification that you have, that you're seeking to get. That makes sense?
Yeah.
Yeah. And that may go for a number of students in programs, that linkage looks there. But again, we're coming back to the purpose issue here of, I kind of went off on a tangent there a little bit because we were talking about learner-centered teaching. And that has to be an agreed upon function in an organization. We must agree on what our purpose is. If we don't agree on our purpose, then we can't move forward. All right?
Sir, I
That's
just took the test and I got multimodal.
your multimodal. That's good.
Yeah.
That means you can work in a whole host of different organizations. Who's speaking there? Multimodal.
Rennie.
Which one did you score the highest in?
Pardon?
Which one did you score the highest in?
Or I got 13 in kinesthetic and oral.
All right. So you're still kind of heavily biased towards
and visual. Visual is 10 and read and write is 11.
So your key preference is still in those areas of visual and kinesthetic. So just remember that. But one, you're not really badly off in terms of one area isn't very so far away from each other. That's why they refer to you as multimodal. But your preference will tend to be doing things as opposed to just reading things. Okay. All right. We were talking about how the development of that common purpose. So that you have two primary vision activities that are required. Personalized vision and socialized vision. So we need to understand what that means. Personalized vision refers to the individual themselves. And generally, that'll be the organizational's leader. When they come up with a vision that is driven from their personal authority in the organization, so that they're coming up with the plan. So in a lot of instances, we have all experienced personalized vision where in a family, for example, when a parent or parents make a decision, it is their vision. And we have to live with the vision that they have because as children, oftentimes we're not consulted in terms of where that vision is going to go. So now think about it, translate it now to the world of work. You go into the world of work and you come across leaders who have created a vision based upon what they want to do. How much, if anything, have they been able to share or get you to share for that? That brings us to the next area of socialized visions. Socialized visions are building visions from all the members of the group. So let's go back to that concert that we were talking about. At the beginning of the planning stages of this concert, we come together and we agree we have this concert we want to put on. But what is everybody's idea of what that concert would look like? That is what I'm trying to get to. How would that product look like? What would it look like? How do we perceive it going forward? What are the kind of acts we'd like to put on it? What would the stage look like? How will we address all of the issues that's going on? What do we want at the end of the day from? Are we just throwing this concert just for so, or are we doing it because there's some special event, for example, that's coming up as a result, and we'd like to do something for whatever reason that we try to develop it for. Think about it from that perspective. But if you're working in an organization, it therefore becomes important for you to have a shared vision of what an organization is going to be. Now, if you're new to an organization, it is incumbent upon the other people in the organization to share that particular agreed upon vision of the organization's focal point. Now, one of the problems that a lot of students that attend the college will have a problem with, and this is why we try to inundate you with that information about our vision and mission statement, is because we need our students to be able to share in the vision that we've created. Now, in the creation of the vision and mission statement for COSTAT, it utilized this approach, socialized vision generation. Every college, every member of staff was asked to contribute, and it was a long process. It took almost a year for that vision statement to be generated and agreed upon, where it was going to be able to address the needs of everybody and what they thought about. Because generally, when the vision of the college was written, it was written only from the academics, the lecturers. We fail to recognize as lecturers the importance of the administrative staff that supports us. And a lot of times there's a conflict between the administration of the organization and the faculty that teaches the organization, because they're seen as separate parts of the organization, when in truth and in fact they are actually part of the entire process. If you ever look at the structure of and somebody here will be looking at it in terms of one of the chapters that you all are presenting on complex organizations. The organizational structure tends to reflect what is at the central or most important critical point of the organization. And interestingly enough, who do you think should be the focal point of COSTAT's vision? Who do you perceive the vision statement is focusing on? You get to that document again. Who do we see from that statement is the focal point of the vision statement?
So new students?
Sorry?
New students?
No, it's not new students, but students generally.
So, but
everything
the students won't the students who are already existing in the atmosphere already have this already? And the new students, when they're introduced to the course, right, or to the semester, they will see this, and this will be what they have in their head as they continue their years at the college. So it generally caters towards new students.
No, it caters to all, because you are a new student. But you did.
So you understand what I'm saying, or are you trying to ignore what I'm saying?
No, I'm trying to understand what you're saying.
Okay.
What I'm asking you is, who is the focal point of the vision statement in the organization? Who is the focus, or who's supposed to be the focus? You're saying new students, but I'm telling you it's all students. The student body is supposed to be the focal point. That makes sense to you? I don't know. Jamal, that was you who was speaking to me just now?
Of course.
Right there. Could you clarify why do you see a distinction?
If I did it the first time and I didn't get it, why do it the second time and a third time?
Sorry? Say that again?
If I did it the first time and you failed to catch it, why would I do it a second time and a third time?
Because I'm asking for clarification.
So you don't need clarification. If we didn't catch you the first time, you won't get it the second time and the third time.
I don't quite agree with you, but
Well, let's agree to disagree. That's what this class is about, right?
yes, it is.
All right, perfect.
All right. All right. So it's the focal point of the vision statement at that point would be for all students. The organization is supposed to be set up with all students centralized in the vision of the statement. Now, that is where the socialized vision is supposed to work from. Does it work from that position? That's the other thing that we have to do. Is it successful in sharing that vision among all of the communities within the organization? And that may be where things fall apart. Because if people are not seeing or buying into the vision, then that creates a problem in the organization. And that happens because, as I said before, in a lot of instances, the organization's ability to build that commonality of vision statement is problematic because not everybody agrees with where the vision is going or agrees with how that vision is being achieved. Or first of all, they don't see it as being important at all. And that is one of the issues that faces all organizations. And it's up to leaders within the organizations to re-emphasize that particular vision and move it forward within the organization. All right, so moving forward from the purpose issue here, effective leaders don't just impose their vision, they try to share it. And that's the whole concept that they're trying to work to. Whether or not they are designed to be able to pull everybody into it is going to be dependent upon a lot of their soft skills and how they're going to be able to develop it across the board moving forward, trying to pull things together. And that's a critical element that a lot of leaders have to spend a great deal of time trying to get people to share in the value systems or the ideas that you're trying to get through. So again, if I go back to the example of the concert that we're looking at, if you're working in a youth group and that group of individuals don't all share the commonality of that that output that you're looking at and why you're doing it, then you're going to have a lot of trouble trying to get people to do things because they're not all buying into this. I don't see the point of doing this concert. This is just a waste of time. It's not making sense, that kind of stuff. And you start to get that pulling and tugging that's going on. And as a leader, and in most of these organizations, they usually elect a leader among the followers or among the groups. They usually have some sort of leadership design in that particular sense. And the objective of the leader is to drive people towards that particular goal or objective. But how they go about doing it is the thing that we're looking at here, sharing this vision of where you want to go in the future. And that's an important element that the program or this relational model speaks to. It is important because it has a dramatic impact upon how people act upon it. Because if you're not engaged in the vision, then you're going to disengage from the organization and you're going to disengage from the whole activity because you no longer see it as being important. So therefore, it's one of the reasons why purpose is such a critical part of the relational leadership model. It starts from setting up that organizational goal and objective. So they speak a lot here about the importance of vision, and that is going to come up in a lot of details in vision and mission, one of the presentations that's coming up from one of the chapters. So you all are going to be actually teaching more about the activity in terms of what is vision, what is mission, what is its purpose and function in an organization, because the relational leadership model starts to speak to the importance of it. Now, working for positive change. One of the common purposes that people tend to always set up their organizations for is towards making some form of positive change. And that is critical because change is the only constant in life. The last chapter or the last presentation actually is going to treat with this particular concept and how you go about dealing with change. Now, why is change an important element? It's important because most people, if not well, change is a difficult thing to navigate through because it requires making yourself uncomfortable. And that uncomfortableness is one of the problems that creates a lot of challenges in organizations when they're trying to move forward in terms of trying to make some sort of change. And whether or not the change is positive or negative is dependent upon where you may be in an organization and how the change is likely to affect you. So in order for any organization to survive, they have to change. If they don't change, then they're likely to get left behind. There's a part of the chapter that reads to you either change or perish. Because if you don't make the appropriate changes, given the changes in the environment that's taking place around you, you're likely to get lost in the shuffle. A lot of organizations have disappeared because they were unwilling to look at changes that took place. For instance, Kodak. Anybody familiar with that company, Kodak? What happened with Kodak?
Sir.
What was Kodak famous for? Or what was his primary?
Digital camera. They didn't want to digitize the industry, so they stuck to their old camera, and eventually they lost their market.
Right, and that's because they didn't see digital because in particular it had to do with film and the expense of processing film and so on. And moving into the digital environment created that issue, and they fell apart. Another company that failed to kind of move with the times is Nokia. Anybody knows that company?
Yes, sir.
What was the name
How
of
many
that
of you
company?
all Nokia?
No, oh yeah.
Nokia. They were a telephone company or mobile phone. In fact, they had some of the best mobile phones. But what happened was they did not make the change into the smartphone era, and because they didn't see the need for all that processing power for a phone, and they got left behind in the mid 2000s or so, when the smartphones started to become more popular. You know, there's another phone that kind of lost their way too is a company is a BlackBerry. If you wanted to be in business, or if you were in business, you had to have a BlackBerry. Anybody remembers that? That company?
Oh yeah.
Right.
And
they
the
just
only thing left of them now is the messaging app.
right. Can you think of other organizations that didn't make change in time?
Blockbuster, I think.
Well, actually, no. Blockbuster did. Blockbuster became Netflix.
No, it didn't become Netflix.
No, like
It's a different
Blockbusters.
company.
There's only like one Blockbuster store like somewhere in America now, and it's become a bit of like a tourist attraction.
What?
Yeah, you go to
Yeah.
like the last Blockbuster. I think there's something called like the last Blockbuster. They still sell like physical copies of stuff.
I thought they went
Yeah,
completely back.
Nah,
Yeah.
there's like one, but it's like the final one. It's like they're selling merch. They're like trying to capitalize off like the nostalgia as well as the whole thing with them and Netflix, which is actually kind of like a creative business move. I'm not gonna lie.
I mean, what else
There's
can they do?
well, they sell like physical movies as usual. They have merch. It's kind of like a tourist attraction actually. You can search up like the last Blockbuster. I think there might even be like a documentary about it on Netflix. I'm not sure.
Yes, there is. Yeah.
That is some irony right there.
No, I think what they did is they capitalized upon that nostalgia movement. I think they realized they became the last blockbuster to exist. But understandably, other companies that are suffering from online streaming are some of the film companies outside there, like the MGM and Sony and stuff like that, because they're getting what they see it as, they're getting hurt by online streaming, and they're not getting the kind of revenues that they had before in the past in terms to pay for their movies and stuff like that. So that's an interesting concept that you're looking at there. But can you think of any other, now, based upon who you are in the organization, the change that needs to be made can in fact be both positive and negative to the individuals. So let's consider, for example, the change that's taking place in GATE right now. That's a change that's taking place, right? Now, who is it? Is it good for everybody? Or is it good for some and negative for others? You all know what the change in the GATE policy is, right?
When they kept like slashing how much
Yes, sir.
money
They allow, no, so they're allowing you to upgrade. So if you've already done a program prior, so undergrad, you can move on to bachelor's and they'll fund you.
Right. But there are other changes that were made in the past. So, for example, when the government said at one point in time they would only fund one program, and it doesn't matter what the level is, it could be a certificate, diploma, associate degree, or bachelor's degree, they said they will only fund one program. That had a dramatic impact upon the enrollment levels in the colleges nationally, because a lot of students were accessing GATE to be able to go to school. And that kind of caused a problem, because now people who were like in our college, for example, here, where people were moving from the associate level into the bachelor's level, they could no longer get funding for the bachelor's. Now, of course, there's that system where you can do multiple degrees and move from one into the next, and the government says that they will in fact go ahead and fund the higher level degree as well, as long as there's a connectivity. But there's a caveat to that. The caveat is that what? The degrees that you're doing or the education that you're engaging in has to be of national importance, or within the requirement of national. Yes, Terry?
Oh no, I wasn't saying anything, sorry. My mic was on, I'll turn it off.
No worries. Okay, so change theory actually speaks about how do you go about managing change and getting change. So that a lot of people talk about change being freeze, unfreeze, change, and then refreeze. And the unfreezing is caused by what they refer to as a trigger event. So the only time change starts to come up is when something goes wrong. And unfortunately, when something goes wrong, the process of unfreezing becomes very difficult, because it might require a lot of money to be able to actually make the change. Excuse me. Especially if we think about it from the point of view of equipment that you're utilizing and processes that you're utilizing. It may require a lot of spending to be able to get it done. But one of the things that they talk about here is that whatever triggers the change and however the change begins to occur, people are going to be influenced by it. But what they're trying to say is that one of the things that you should look at doing is not, when you make the change, don't freeze it again, but leave it kind of slushy, in essence. And the reason why you want to leave it slushy is because you want to leave your organization in a level of preparedness for future changes. So you can't nail everything down. And that's one of the things, for example, that happens with all of the programs that you all do in the college. And that is that when you make a change, you want to be able to review again in a couple of times to be able to respond to what's happening in the marketplace around you. So, for example, the first degrees that we ran in the college when we first started was made up of a different set of courses than the courses that we have running now, because the courses have to respond to the changing environments in which we find ourselves. But in the past, degrees and the nature of programs were very difficult to change because they had a very stiff change process. In fact, most of the programs you couldn't meddle with the content of the program at all, because once it was approved, it was like cast in cement or carved on a rock. For you to make a change, you had to break the whole thing up. And that was important for us to be able to build into the system a flexible method of being able to adjust the program as the environment and technology changed along with it, to be able to get that done. So this is especially with highly technically innovative areas, especially in areas like IT and those areas. They were very important that those programs had to be able to change and adapt to those changes as quickly as possible, or else the qualification becomes redundant and irrelevant, more importantly. And you don't want to have a degree that's irrelevant. Now, when I went back in the days when I did my degree in the University of West Indies, the content of that degree its relevance was maintained by lecturers actually putting in extra content that was not testable, just evaluating it from because the absolute content remained consistent with whatever the approved programs were. And in a lot of instances, you didn't need to worry about that area, because all you needed to do was to study what was necessary to pass the exam and forget about the rest, basically. So that you ended up in a situation with people coming out of organizations, and this happened not only in Trinidad, but around the world. People started to come out of universities, and their qualifications were no longer relevant to the environment they found themselves. And that's one of the things that education in generally has to learn. It needs to be more malleable, because the environment that we're working in is no longer the same environment in which the initial programs were designed. So if you think about, again, if we go back to the secondary school system, the secondary school system is extremely difficult to change because it's so heavily regulated by the Ministry of Education and by the Examination Council and so on. And those things make it very, very difficult to make any types of changes, especially changes of a nature that reflects what's going on in our current society and the world around us. So in essence, what ends up happening is by the time you finish your degree and you graduate, you have to start back that process, which is why one of the reasons why the college also in its learning outcomes or its vision speaks to producing lifelong learners. It's an important another important concept, because in order for you to maintain the relevance of your qualification, you need to understand that from time to time you will always need to go and do updates of your qualification. You can't allow yourself to become stale in the organization. That makes sense? Yeah. So that's why the unfreezing process, you want to actually, when you make a change, create a situation in which it's not refrozen and solidified, but more be a little more slushy, able to address the changes that are necessary to be able to deal with the changes that are going to happen. Not that might happen, but they are going to happen. So you want to create a system in which the model is creating a situation of very, very flexible situation that you find yourself. Now, that might be difficult, given some of anybody here in the accounting programs? Anybody here doing accounting in this group?
Yes, sir.
All right. So one of the biggest changes that took place was brought on by what occurred in the 90s and the middle 2000s that led to a lot of change. Well, all right. So let
I'm
me.
not sure, but was it the financial crisis?
Yes, and the behavior of some firms like Enron and God, was it these other idiots where yeah, well, Enron was one of the biggest ones, but you have Enron and a lot of them, but they were one of the things that happened is that there was a lax in standards in accounting, and the international standards of accounting were not taking into consideration changes that were taking place and the ethical value system that the accountants were kind of bending and moving around. They called it back in the day creative accounting. All right, um, and that led to the development of what is it that I'm trying to get to? What is it that determines the operations of accountants?
The international accounting standards.
Yes, and those standards have to be agreed upon internationally, and generally they are reviewed how often, Bachan?
That's one I cannot answer.
You should join you should go and look it up. But what happens is they recognize that accounting standards had been slipping and changing, and people were doing things that were unethical. In fact, I think they made an ethical examination part of the required training, not so? Ethics?
Yes.
So this kind of works in that area because, but supposedly there was a reason for it, was because a lot of accountants behave very unethically, and therefore they had to try and build into the program. And primarily the reason for that is they want people to trust accountants. They don't want to look at accountants like they are thieves and manipulators of the truth. Um, creative accounting. All right, so that's something that you wanna be aware of. It's a good example of what I'm talking about in creating a situation where when you make the change, you don't freeze the change. You try to make it kind of slushy so that you're doing. And the reason for that is because change is time consuming. You can spend a lot of time um, navigating changes, and then at the end of the day, you're so focused on making the change that it means that day-to-day operations may suffer. Because you have to remember, a company is running or organization is running, it has to deal with its day-to-day operational requirements while navigating overall and structural changes to the organization simultaneously. And it makes for a very stressful environment. Tell you from practice, whenever we're going through curriculum changes on a regular basis, we still have to teach classes while doing all of the other activities of going through the process of doing the research and quantifying why we're doing what we're doing in terms of making curriculum changes to match what's going on in the world around us. And that requires a lot of time and effort, and in a lot of instances, a lot of money too. Companies spend a lot of money on change management and transitional management. So that's actually something that is important for organizations to understand and to accept. And as a leader, one of the things that you're going to have to be looking at doing is to go into the concept of accepting the need for change. Now, how many of you all think yourselves are open to regular change? Because they generally refer to younger individuals tend to be more open to change, whereas older individuals tend to get. Greg, go ahead.
No, so I was just raising my hand.
Or to agree, all right. And that's because but you have to think about change from a very practical point of view. Huh? If you think about your ability to deal with immediate change in your immediate environment, so for some people, for example, who have not ADHD, but OCD, change is difficult. because they like things in a particular way. But if you are able to work in circumstances in which there's some level of confusion, you might find yourself better suited for managing change. Not that you have to work in a messy environment, but change makes the environment that you're operating in very messy, and it feels kind of incomplete along the way, and it has some problems with that. All right, so let's move to the next area. Relational leadership is inclusive, and we spoke about this before, the importance of being inclusive, understanding, valuing, and actively engaging diversity in views, approaches, styles, aspects of individuality, such as sex or culture, adding multiple perspectives to a group's activities. Now, this is becoming of late, I've been finding that inclusivity is an issue that a lot of organizations are having problems with. And there are lots of individuals outside there who are very adamant about not accepting aspects of individuality. And we can see those arguments going on all the time and all around us in a number of issues. But the type of leadership that the model is speaking to is that we are looking at developing the ability to be inclusive. You don't have to agree with somebody's position of where they stand in terms of some sort of idea or value system. But what you need to be able to do is to understand. You don't have to agree with it, but you need to at least understand why people have generated or have come to a particular way of looking at something. That is, you need to understand why individuals approach issues from different perspectives or different frames, why they develop, why their value systems will be different to yours. A lot of times we end up arguing with people because their value structure is seen as alien to ours. And that is the focal point of the relationship. So we're only focused on the differences and we don't look at the similarities. And we keep on having problems with those individuals because, or those types of individuals in our lives, because we perceive it as being a problem because we focus only on the differences and we're unwilling to think along that person's line and accept their understanding of the world around them. And I remember we did the perception exercise in class in the first chapter, where we had those pictures of the individuals. There are a couple of other pictures that you can find online where it starts to look at that whole concept. But it's to open your eyes up to the fact that as many people that are in an organization, you can have people all seeing a particular situation or circumstance being different. So that's their perception. And the reason why they have that particular perception is what, as a leader, you need to understand. Why do people at certain levels in an organization view a particular issue as being dangerous to them? Why should we value people differently in organizations? Because of the way they dress, or because of their gender, or because of how they think? That's the questions that I'm asking you all to kind of grapple with here. Because those are leadership issues that you have to deal with when you get outside into the world of work. You have to start to develop that skill of being inclusive and being able to generate the ability to develop that inclusivity. This is not easy because we are bombarded by the problems that a lot of these institutions develop, and that is a critical element, because the world around us is telling us, well, everybody's making judgments, and if you are unable to deal with your own issues in dealing with other people, then you're going to have problems across the board. Now, in Trinidad and Tobago, inclusivity um, is an issue that comes up in particular in politics, and it transcends our society because there's a polarization that takes place in the organization or in organizations as a result. Politically, there's the divide between the Indians in society and the Africans in society, or blacks in societies, depending upon how you want to refer to it. And that division creates absolutely illogical nonsense that takes place from my perspective. I see it as being nonsensical because collectively we're Trinidadians. All right, whether your ancestry is from one area or the other makes no difference. All right, but we have to understand, why will somebody think like that? Why do people behave like that or think from that perspective? And that is the most important thing that we need to understand. Not that we don't agree with them, but what we need to do, you may not agree with them in terms of what they do, but your job as a leader is to understand why they have developed that particular type of thinking, and be able to work through that difference to be able to get the best out of them in your organization. Because in a lot of businesses that you're going to go out there and a lot of activities you're going to go out, you don't have control over who's coming into the organization. You can't control your customers because it's anybody who has the purchasing power. That's the only thing that denies people from being able to access your product or your good or your service. Who has the purchasing power? And in a lot of organizations, especially if you deal with the public sector, and a lot of you, I think, here work or operate within the public sector, you have no control who's coming to access public goods or who's in the public domain that you're working in, and in terms of employees and fellow workers and so on. You have no control over that. And the fact of the matter is that you're bombarded with diversity all the time. And you are in a place where you have to develop the skills necessary to become effective as being inclusive. The model requires that we become inclusive, not to dilute your own personal value structure, but to be able to understand why and how people develop these types of these other perceptions. We need to understand that. And honestly, I'll tell you from experience, if you focus on understanding why somebody behaves the way they do or thinks the way they do, it's a lot easier than trying to change their behavior. Because if you understand, then you can generate in your mind why perceptions vary so widely. And it becomes easier for you to be able to manage somebody from that perspective. But there are levels to this inclusivity that will be evaluated from in different chapters in more detail moving forward. All right. And again, for you to be able to share that vision that you have of the organization, then you have to embrace all the people that make up your society. And that's going to be a critical element across the board. That inclusivity is really critical for you to be able, as a leader, to be able to pull everybody together and be able to draw on what they are able to bring to your organization or to the activities that you're engaging in, and take away from it the negativities that you may perceive, because you and all will be coming into the situation with your own perceptions, your own value structures, your own methods of doing things. And you have to understand that not everybody is the same. People are different and they're going to work differently. And you have to be able to manage that as a leader. If you think about it from the position, from any kind of group work you've done in school, you have different people working in groups. And this is where there's a group that has to deal with groups and teams. Being able to manage conflict is going to be one of your major skills that you're going to be having to work on. That's mediation and negotiations. That's one of the other skill sets that has to be, that they talk about interpersonal skills. Those are the situations that you find yourself engaging in. a lot when you're doing group work. So a lot of you all have, how many of you all here have engaged in group work and run into lots of issues from a group class or class conflict? Any of y'all? No? I seriously doubt that. If it's the one thing that I've ever heard students complain about, is they always complain about the amount of, excuse me, the amount of group work that comes with the organization of your courses, and they complain bitterly. All right. So some tricks some techniques that you can utilize when you're trying to be inclusive is by using more of a discussion where you use the word we instead of I. That we focus is to try and bring people in, not exclude people, and it's important. Therefore, when we discuss things, to be able to have that more inclusive vocabulary when you're speaking to people, because if we continue utilizing the I, that individual focus, then we create a situation where you might be discouraging that inclusivity that they talk about. Evaluate your group activities, and try to work out in the past what you've been able to do in terms of developing your group activities, and what type of techniques you utilize in managing your group conflicts. I have some exercises that you'll be working on in terms of that. And some of the things that we talk about in terms of working with groups, there are practices that block inclusivity. So voting is one of them. Because interestingly enough, when you vote, you actually end up with it may sound democratic, right? But what ends up happening is that part of your group does not agree with you and voted against it. But if you work only on the majority members situation, then what happens to those people who voted against it? So one of the better models that they tend to refer to is the consensus model. And even that has problems as well. What's the difference by making decisions through voting and consensus? Anybody can tell me?
So maybe you come to a more common ground in consensus with the group.
All right. Very good. Yes. So consensus is a method of trying to develop common ground, and therefore what the promise in consensus is that I may not agree with everything that the group has decided, because this is the way we have to look at it. I may not agree with everything that the group has decided, but I will support what they're doing. That makes sense? That's consensus. As opposed to if we voted, who voted yes and who voted no, and those who vote yes, the majorities have it. Well, the no's, chili piggy, and that ends up with a situation where people who voted against disengage, and that disengagement creates a problem, because when they're trying to execute now, the people who voted against will always stay back and say, I tell you they go work, I voted against it, and that does not build that consensus or that inclusivity. It creates barriers to that particular thing. So voting in group work is not necessarily one of the better methodologies that you can utilize in terms of coming to decisions. That's why they always refer to the consensus model. Now, the problem with the consensus model is that it takes a longer time to get there. And you have to be very, you have to identify everybody who's involved with that particular thing. Now, if it's a group activity, so Shareholders and stakeholders. This is stakeholders are external to the group. The issue is there are people whose input we don't seek when we're making decisions, who we ought to have looked for. People outside of the organization who are in fact impacted by the decisions that you've made. So whenever we have to make changes to curriculum, we actually have to spend time in something called a program advisory committee, getting stakeholder and shareholder views about the current version and the new version. And it's time consuming. It really is time consuming because we have to engage all of the individuals who are likely to be impacted, not only faculty and staff and students, but we also have to think about the employers and the people who use the qualifications in their organizations when we make these adjustments and changes. Because making a small change in a qualification can create big problems down the road for people in the stakeholder area, which is external to the organization itself. But they're the people who use the qualifications. So for example, if we were to make dramatic changes in the radiography program that impacted upon the willingness of the Ministry of Health, for example, hiring radiologists because they have a problem now with an aspect of your qualification that they deem as being critical, but the college no longer looks as being relevant. You understand what we're talking about here now? So they may have made a change in the syllabus saying that, all right, so this practice in the past is now, what's the word I'm use? Is now irrelevant. It no longer exists, but the ministry has not made the adjustment, and therefore the exemption of that idea or concept from the qualification does not qualify you for job placement because they view it as being missing from the degree, basically, that you're doing. And therefore, you have to go and find a place that is willing to provide that additional training to top up. Now, actually, that's something that took place in people who did IT qualifications in other institutions in Trinidad and Tobago. They found themselves in problems when they went to the Ministry of Education to register as an IT teacher. The analysis of their degrees indicated that there was insufficient programming done in the degree. And they had to find themselves going back to another institution to get the additional qualifications to add to the degree so that they can then qualify. Now, that's a frustrating thing for somebody to come across, that they were doing a degree that they thought would open them up for an opportunity to join the Ministry of Education in that activity, only to be told that no, this degree doesn't cover this area and we need yada, 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 and so on. And that's something that a lot of people don't pay attention to when they are making these changes, because they're not paying attention to the other stakeholders in your decision-making process, and therefore they have excluded them. So it's important to remember that, because you don't know. If you don't know, you're not going to be aware of the fact that you're affecting people outside of an organization if you're not looking in that direction. So a pretty good example of that taking place. All right, so again, being inclusive means we have to involve everybody's view, and it becomes problematic because, again, everybody's view is not based upon your own. A lot of people look to the college as a source of labor. They want qualified people to come and work for them. But what are they expecting you to come out into the job market doing and being able to do? So sometimes there's a huge disconnect between what employers want and what is actually feasible within the ambit of a bachelor's degree. Because sometimes some employers want want things that would require experience to develop that skill. And unfortunately, there's a whole set of disconnects that take place. Again, there needs to be open dialogue between people so that they can understand what's going on. But again, the biggest issue that comes up with being inclusive is the fact that you have to pay attention to the other people that are in the whole process of getting changes dealt with, and the impact that it's likely to have. So this is a matrix here that looks at the responsiveness of stakeholders to shared issues and goals. So here you're looking at degree of importance versus perspective on the issues. So again, it's just looking at where people will likely fall, or stakeholders are likely to fall if you are trying to engage with them. And this has been a problem for us in terms of being able to do focus group studies and interviews and questionnaire response and stuff like that, because we have to work out how best to bring in the views of people outside of the organization, especially those who are going to be affected or who are stakeholders in the particular activity. Because if the organization views it as being of low importance and high opposition, their responsiveness to is likely to be problematic. As if things are of low importance, the responsiveness of organizations there is like, I don't need to do this. If, however, it's of high importance, and people are in high opposition to the change, then they're going to be antagonistic as opposed to supportive. And that's basically, this kind of is a matrix that is utilized when you're evaluating the type of methods you're going to utilize to engage with these groups. Because if you know that they're likely to fall into particular types of groups, then you'd have to use different methodologies to get into that. So for example, in an area where you might find a high level of support, you might use a less invasive method of, let's say, a send out questionnaires for people to be able to respond to you. But if there's high opposition, then you might need to use something a little more because if they're highly antagonistic, then you might need to use an instrument that is likely to help manage the level of subjectivity to the response. So you might use more of objective style questionnaire system in terms of trying to get your thing, because you don't want the emotive response. You want the actual quantitative data that you can derive from it. That technique of running questionnaires is problematic when it's viewed as being low importance or low priority, because then people will just disengage and don't bother about it. So you might want to schedule short meetings or a focus group where you get people to participate. And of course, therein lies some issues, because you might have an issue that you're dealing with that might be of low importance but has high levels of opposition. Then in engaging in an activity for that, you will run into a lot of problems. So you have to engage with that in terms of how you design your focus group studies. So there are lots of issues that come up with that. All right, empowerment. This is one of the other 5 concepts that they talked about in terms of the thing. Now, when we speak about empowerment from a leadership perspective, we're speaking about, as a leader, empowering others to become leaders themselves. That's a really important element that the leadership model is built upon. One of your responsibilities as a leader is to create in other individuals the capacity to lead themselves. Now, there's a whole number of things that you have to be able to do, because what you're trying to develop here is highly independent, critical thinking individuals in your organization who can take over and drive the change that you are looking to do as a leader moving forward. It means that you have to create the conditions and the environment that allows for them to develop their own skills and not monopolize everything and hold it to yourself. That is a problem because in the past, control of conditions and control of the environment was always seen as the political strategy that is utilized in maintaining power, and that is another part of it. So empowering as opposed to keeping all the power yourself. That is the issue of empowerment. You're giving up your power. That is sometimes threatening to a lot of leaders because you're initially what you're doing here, or in effect, what you're doing is you're giving up your power to other people. And some leaders are are heavily challenged by that particular issue. And there's a chapter on power and influence that you all will be presenting on this particular area in a lot more detail that I can talk about here. Zero sum basis. Okay, so this is the view of power that I'm talking about. That zero sum basis is all or nothing. I have all the power, you have none. Or you have all the power, I have none. That has always been the thinking process that goes along with it. The relational leadership model is trying to say we need to share power. You need to have the power to do certain things on your own without me telling you to do it or giving over the power. So it's important that we understand this concept of being able to share power and move away from the autocratic approaches and work to more collaborative or collegial approaches. That's what they're referring to here. That's the movement that they're talking to, that we want to make those changes. So that it's critical because, as I said before, it's part of the relational model because we need to be able to develop leaders among our followers. So this is the way in which we do that is by giving of our power and giving up our power to other people in order to empower them to be able to come forward. Now, sources of power, again, you all will do this in more detail, but how people arrive at being powerful in an organization or in groups or whatnot, it's either through, these are what they refer to as sources of power. You all deal with this in more detail. Expert power, referent power, legitimate power, coercive power, or reward power. So this is the methodology that they talk about. Expert power, you arrive in a situation of being an expert. And because you're the expert and you're qualified in the area and that type of stuff, you're able to, people look to you as the expert and they trust that you have it. So once you exhibit that, then you're the expert. That's a source of where you get power from. Referent power is similar to expert power, but more in the nature that people see you as an advisor, like the wise old person and the wise older employer or employee in the organization. Referent power means you don't necessarily need to have positional power in terms of having a positional power or legitimate power in the organization, but people look to you or they defer to you with reference because they trust you in terms of that. And that's another place where you get forward. Legitimate power is the power that is given to you by your position in the organization. That power can be that power is fleeting because there are lots of people who are legitimately heads of departments or supervisors, but other things going on demote them as that type of leader power because there are other things that help to contribute to your ability. So you might have your power in name only, but nobody believes you're the leader. They don't look to you as the leader because they don't trust you for whatever reason. Coercive power is the power to be able to punish or reward people So kind of speaks to the same thing almost. But coercive really is about, if you don't do this, I will punish you. And that's one of the ways in which you get power. It's one of the reasons why um, we wanted to get rid of that coercive behavior in schools in particular, where they were using punishment to reinforce coercive power, so that the only way you would do something is if you get punished. So that comes from that whole motivational carrot and stick thinking process. So a source of power, however, has to come with that, because we're not talking about physical punishment. Here you could get fired, or you could get demoted, or you could lose a bonus, or get deductions. Those are the kind of threats that can be used to get you to do something. And it's not a form of power that you ought to be using, but it's something that is available to leaders. As opposed to coercive power, reward power is the other side of it, where you encourage people through motivating them by rewarding them with things like praise, plaques, money, those types of things, either intrinsic or extrinsic rewards that you provide that give you power in an organization, because you are the repository of those rewards. As the manager, you can give out those things. So those are the ways in which you get power. How you use the power is, of course, based upon what the vision is of the organization, how you're going to be able to motivate people. So the concept that they're talking about here is when and how to use power. So this is something we have to be careful with. We have to understand power a little better, because the phrase here, in many cases, we give power away. We do it when we do not trust our own opinion if it contradicts with that of an expert. Now, this happens a lot when we kind of suffer from self-confidence issues. So we give it away because we don't believe ourselves, in essence. Basically, that's what it's saying. And it can happen in very subtle ways. You're sitting in a meeting, somebody's making a suggestion, and you're not quite knowledgeable about the area, but it doesn't sound like that's not really making sense, But that's not my area. That's not my field. And we therefore give in or give or defer to that individual. And therefore that gives away my power I might have legitimate power, that type of stuff, and I might give it away because I am unsure whether or not. Now that shows a situation where there may be a need for us to go and learn more. All right, so we have to understand that we can regain our power if we do that, but you have to stop doing those kind of things. So it's one of the ways in which you do it. We give away power if we do not say, let's talk about that first, because we might have some additional ideas that would be helpful. Now, when a person with legitimate power announces a plan or approach, we give power away if we do not engage in discussion. And this happens a lot when people in positions in an organization who are employed as or given the position of head of departments or something, and they come up with an idea and say, we're going to do it this way. If you, as somebody in the organization, feel as if you can speak up and say, well, no, let's talk about this first before we go forward, and we make a decision about it, because there may be some alternatives. Now, this also depends upon the organization you're working with. Will the persons hosting will you, as the leader, engage in discussion, or just tell people, go with this because this is what was decided? That is not empowering. That is taking power away from people. So you have to think about where you are in relation to the understanding of power here. All right. Sometimes we give power to people because we think they ought to know. So I like this example here. When the group assumes that because you are an English major, you'll be best at writing the report. and that may not be true. Now, I don't know if you all do that or if you all get people to, but who kind of ends up in your group putting the one of the things that happens a lot in mixed groups of mixed disciplines is that a lot of times people would tend to give the PowerPoint job to anybody from IT. So any IT students here who get that type of thing, whenever they're in a group, they always get shoved into the, well, you do the PowerPoint because you're IT. You ever get that kind of decision making taking place? No?
Yes, it happens.
Right, you're an IT student? No,
No,
you're
accountant, but I've seen it happen.
right, yeah. Because you expect that, hey, you're supposed to know the software, but that's not quite true, is it? Because IT is not necessarily about applications. All right, so that's something about power and how it could be given up and so on. So the thinking process here is that power is something that is not a finite exercise. It can be shared, and the whole concept here is that if we don't share power, then we're going to want to hold all that power to ourselves. And the inability to share your power with other people is not the concept that we're trying to sell here. Right? The conventional leadership paradigm sees sharing of power as indecisiveness or avoidance of responsibility. Now, a lot of managers that I came across in the past always saw power sharing or empowerment as, well, they never really used empowerment because they would always come to us as juniors, and especially if you're a junior in the organization, they'd always come to us and say, hey, before you do anything, I have to approve that. Because I am the one responsible. And oftentimes you have to give up that thinking. And the problem is that a lot of these conventional ideas still exist, especially in the public service. You can't do anything without approval from on top. And that whole UFS system that exists in the public sector it really cripples the organization. So because you can't do anything because you have no authority. And that's the sad thing about organizations. For an organization to be dynamic at all levels of its operations, it has to share power in terms of decision making in particular. All right, the clerk at the front desk needs to be able to do things to deal with the consumer right in front of them. But if they are there and they're saying, hey, I can't do anything about this now, you have to take what you get, then you've lost connectivity. Think about how that works with in a shop where you have to sell items. And the person at the counter who's liaising directly with the consumer has no leeway to make a decision about a product, all right, that that impacts upon the marketability and the popularity of your product. That's a dangerous thing if you think about it from that perspective. If you give leeway and you give power to workers in the lower part of the organization to be able to make decisions that will impact positively on your product or your service, then, I mean, how many of you all, or us, I should say, how many of us evaluate a firm by the relationship or the activities that the person you're interacting with, how they go about doing things? Think about it from that perspective. I mean, you see people getting into conflicts. They go into a place and they start to cuss up somebody at the front desk. And the person at the front desk is only representing the organization and has very limited control over what is being done, what is being offered, what the products are like when they're coming through. How many of us evaluate the company by our experience with the front counter activities? All of us do it. And we as a leader, we have to understand that if at the point of contact with your consumer, you cannot impact or effect some form of change, then you're going to lose your customer base, because it's going to take too long for changes to be made in your product or in your good that will ensure that you remain relevant to your consumers. That's one of the importance that you can see very quickly why there's a need to move away from that old system of withholding power and empowering people. So I mean, if you think about it from that perspective, you need to empower people to be able to make decisions that will help it deal with a circumstance or situation as it must have that type of flexibility. All right. So that's the idea or the concept about what you have to do in relationship to empowerment. All right. So that's the whole thing about moving the power base away from those central positions of residents to open it out to the other people. You're all going to come across the servant leadership model and the servant leadership and the steward leadership models that start to speak to that type of concept moving forward. So the self-empowerment is another aspect of empowerment, which is help create circumstances in which your people can empower themselves, either through encouraging them to go and study, or encouraging them to express themselves, encouraging them to be able to take charge of small projects so that they can develop that ability to experience empowerment on their own. But you have to create the environment for that as a leader. Again, that's what the model is speaking about. So these are some of the things in which you might be able to become empowered: education, leading, structuring, creating structures, factors such as arranging your day, bringing people to the table. Those are things these are things you can do, or the book has identified as methods of being able to become self-empowerment, providing and making sure others have the resources to get a job done. So that's your job as a leader. If you're empowering other people, you can't withhold the resources. You have to give the resources out to them. Mentoring, which is you're not doing it for people, but hey, you're having no problems, come and check me. I'll be able to give you some guidance as to what you're doing. And actualization, taking it on being empowered, claiming it. All right, so actually doing it. Don't think about it, actually do it. Basically what they're talking about, actualization. All right. As a leader, you must value that concept of empowerment, because you need more people to want to do things rather than you have to tell them to do it. And that actually speaks to some broader behaviors in society, which is generally most of our society tends to be very apathetic towards some of these things, and that's something that from a broader perspective of managing the country, we'd like to empower citizens of the country to be able to do more and take ownership of certain aspects of our society. But that can't happen if we don't engage in empowerment activities rather than consolidation of power in smaller areas of the organization and our society. So a lot of our people in our country feel unempowered. They feel as if, their voice is unimportant, their thinking is unimportant, and their behaviors or actions are not important, and that is not true. But at the same time, it is problematic for us in terms of a leadership position. All right, so mattering and marginalizing. So what they're speaking about with this concept of mattering and marginalizing is how you make people feel. Because if you make people feel as if their point of view is important, then you are engaging in mattering, which means you are making people feel as if they are important to a decision or the organization, as opposed to marginalization, which is where you do things in such a way in which people feel marginalized by in the organization or in the context that you're dealing with. You need to be able to develop more mattering concepts or mattering feelings in your organization rather than marginalizing people. And a lot of times we have a tendency to marginalize people without even knowing it, that we're doing it. By the things we say or do, we can marginalize people and make them feel as if, well, my point of view is not important. Or what I have to say is not important because nobody listens to me. And a lot of us feel that way in organizations and in our societies. And that's unfortunate. And it's something that you need to look at as you develop in your leadership potential. Make sure that you avoid marginalizing people in your organization, because that is going to be problematic. Section here is on empowerment environments. Again, you have to engage in this attitudes towards developing the empowerment of organizations and the empowerment of the individuals by creating an environment in which people want to take charge. Not that you're handing off your responsibilities, but you are helping people to engage in management activities or leadership activities by them wanting to do so and them trusting that you will accept what they do, and you're not going to ridicule them or make fun of them, or I don't know if you also use it, kind of make all people in a wider environment and make them feel less about themselves because they made a mistake or because something didn't go the way that it should. Things go wrong. So those kind of feelings that you have, like you're given something to do, it doesn't quite work the way it should, and then you feel as if you're going to be reprimanded or punished. But those aren't the environments you want to create when you give up. You can't give power and plan on them failing. I've seen that as a strategy utilized by some leaders. They give the duties to the individual, but no power. So they have no decision-making ability in terms of getting this thing done, or no resources to be able to get this thing done. And then the leader is sitting back and looking, because what they're doing is they're using that as a way to ridicule the individual so that others will realize, don't ever ask to do something, because they've been made an example of. And now that's a really
I had a maths teacher like that.
Really? In the college, Renee?
No, in primary school, which is probably why I shut off maths in standard 3.
That was horrible. So they make you go and do a assignment on the board and
exactly that.
Wonder why people hate. Well, in your class, I guess a lot of people didn't like mathematics because it ridiculed you and nobody wanted to take a chance. That was really horrible. Chances are he was probably done or treated like that in the past too. All right, so empowerment, real important as one of those things, and creating that environment of empowerment is, it's going to take a lot, because a lot of leaders don't come to the playing field with that thinking in mind of, my job is to create the next set of leaders. And in order to create the next set of leaders, I have to be able to give power to them to be able to do that. All right. So again, we need to remember though that empowerment and delegation is not the same. Okay. Delegation means you're given over the work to be done, but not the responsibilities, nor the decision-making tool. Delegation is not the same as empowerment. Empowerment means you give everything over. And it also means you give over responsibilities too. All right. So as the person receive, now this is where things become a little tricky, because oftentimes when people are given the responsibility and the power to do certain things and they don't get it done, they don't think about that the responsibility now falls upon them. They expect that the person who gave them the work to do will be the one to that's sort of like a student is given an assignment to do, does not do the assignment, and the student is wrong and blames the teacher. That's basically what you're doing, because an assignment that you're given to do is a system of empowering yourself to learn on your own. So a lot of our courses, in terms of the courses I teach, I give over assignments to my students to do, to be able to get them to interact with the material on their own, because I'm not going to teach that topic, because I'm using that as a method for you to engage with the material. So I'm giving up power in my class. I'm saying to you, I'm not going to teach this, you're going to go and do this on your own. And then you'll turn around and tell me afterwards that I didn't do well in that thing because I didn't teach you it. I said, well, at the beginning, I told you we weren't going to be doing that in class, and I do that a lot actually in some of my classes that are less so like you guys here, you all are, I'm giving you the responsibility of teaching the class the chapters that you've chosen. So I'm giving up that power. Understand where that is coming from. All right. So I hope everybody's kind of grasping that whole concept of empowerment. So the other part of ethical and moral leadership, this model emphasizes ethical behavior and value systems. And well, this is where the challenge lies in this model, is the ethical and moral values structure that they're looking at. Relational leadership is ethical. And this is where some of the problems comes up. So this is something that we have to pay attention to in terms of what we're doing. Because, all right, so ethics is the social rules that govern and limit our conduct, especially the ultimate rules concerning right and wrong. Now, there's a problem with this, is that social rules vary across the world. They vary in different societies. Ultimately, what is right and wrong is dependent upon what is socially acceptable in societies. Now, what is socially acceptable in one society may not be acceptable in another society. And this is where we begin to have issues at this ethical lines. And this creates issues and problems moving forward, because relational leadership model is an ethical model. It's a model that is designed upon an appreciation of high levels of moral values. The problem that we find ourselves is whose values or whose rules are we going to be looking at? And that is the issue. Well, it goes into the background of where ethics comes from and that type of stuff. Some of you all may have done this, but if you are interested in this, you should read up on it as well. How do we go about deriving that? And then primarily it is what values are important in the society is what we're going to be seeing being done around us in our societies as a general practice. All right. what behaviors we're looking at there. Okay. As a result of this, some organizations and professions design their own set of rules and values. So like the accounting program that we were just talking about in the past, they had to kind of revise their ethical standards because there were problems with the standards as they existed before, because they were too vague and didn't speak to some specific things that people were kind of bending their rules around. So we have to understand that the whole concept of where we setting these bars, where we setting these rules, is one of the issues that we have to face as a rational leadership or a rational leader or relational leadership, because the value structures is going to be a critical element in determining what we see as being right and wrong. Now, generally, there's some general acceptance of certain ideas of what is right and what is wrong. Here they talk about this whole concept of good and evil, and there's lots of things that that influence this whole concept of good and evil. Primarily, our religious upbringing is one, and the belief structures that we develop. So we want to pay attention, therefore, to those values that we've grown up and has been taught to us over time. And again, you have to worry about if you have people from outside of your society working with you or out from other societies. You have to think about how different their value systems would be to yours and understand why they have that particular variation. All right, from why we think. Now, we're not talking about people who are psychologically damaged or anything like that. We're just talking about general stuff. We're talking about normal folks. All right, we're talking about psychopaths or anything like that. Okay, so values are personal beliefs that we've chosen to take upon ourselves as being those things that guide how we live our lives. So all of you here probably have rules that you operate under. Whether you want to itemize it or write it down or evaluate it, you all operate under a set of rules that you've set for yourself. Things you would do, things that you won't do. And you've developed those from the influences you've had in your life, which is one of the things you're going to be writing about in your self-analysis. Who you are today is going to be greatly influenced by all the things that happened to you in the past and the people and institutions that you interacted with in the past that have influenced you currently. Those are important things that we talk about. There are some things that we all expect across the board. Honesty, that type of stuff. Those are things that we think are kind of standard, you know. So the problem that we have here is that a lot of our leaders don't necessarily show that level of exhibit those levels of behavior, those types of behaviors, and that can be problematic at times. Hold on a sec, let me just bring this back up. All right. Remember we talked about that whole issue of the anti-leadership vaccine in the past, and that's true because the values that we seem to have, we don't see our leaders exhibiting some of those values, and that is kind of problematic because this is where our value systems or ethical values begins to get hazy. And sometimes people change. Well, over time, your value systems change. Honestly, ethical values and beliefs change in societies over time, because what was believed to be normal and acceptable behavior, we have a phrase for it now. It's called politically correct behavior. And if we go and evaluate behaviors from the past to now, we start to realize how many things that was going on in the past are no longer considered to be politically correct. Can you all think of anything that happened in the past that might be of dubious moral value at this point in time that took place in the past? Anybody? Can't think of anything that's that.
Actually,
that
could you repeat the question? Sorry, could you
I
repeat the
said
question?
anything that you can think about from the past that was acceptable as a mode of behavior that is no longer acceptable today in our current experience.
I don't know, hitting kids when they do something bad.
Anything else? I would have thought that a lot of the women here would be able to identify some of those things that, and I'm only talking in, you could look back in the last 10 years, or the last 10 to 20 years. Think about behaviors that were acceptable as normal behaviors in the not too distant 50 years ago to today. What is acceptable? It wasn't long ago that it wasn't that long ago that women weren't allowed to show their ankles and their arms and that kind of stuff, you know. Think about it from in terms of dress codes and forms of dress. It's interesting that you're very few ladies are coming to the fore when I speak about that. I mean, think about women in the workplace. If it weren't for some of our women in the past challenging those value structures or value systems and kind of paving the way for other people, we wouldn't have had women in the workplace anymore at this point in time if there was the same thing. So now currently we have the battle of equality in terms of income earned by women as opposed to men. Now, it's not as divided, I think, in our country as it is in the United States, where men tend to earn X amount of time more than women, and that kind of, because our culture here, well, what we do find is that there are some areas of business activity that tend to be more male dominated or female dominated. So that's actually something that that you could look at or examine in terms of what's going on. But the whole concept about it is that because society values change over time, we would find that our ethical value structure has to also be adjustable. Is the word I'm looking for? It is that it has to be relatively consistent, but consistent given the concept that we're looking for. So that there are some values that don't change. So like I didn't want to say this. I was going to say, you know, killing is a crime, or killing is bad. But there are sorry, somebody wanted to ask a question?
So yeah, it's 5. I have to get back to work now.
All right, no worries. No worries. And I just have a few more slides I want to do. Thanks a lot. I'll put up the recording when it's finished.
Thanks, sir.
Okay. All right. So this is an exercise here that you could utilize as a method of evaluating your own leadership. What do you stand for? And how far are you willing to go to advance that particular concept or idea? Think about that. You could write up about it or just think about this. What do you stand for and how far are you willing to go to move that position forward? All right, so this is what the whole concept about modeling the way. that it speak about here. All right, so the rest of this presentation is going to be talking about leading by example type of thing. And the idea is simply that when we engage in this model, what we expect is to engage in this and be able to look at it as modeling behavior for others to follow. And the reason why it's process oriented is because we want to be able to duplicate this activity in numerous people simultaneously and at different times. Once we utilize the process, we should be able to help to generate better relational leadership activities. Now, it's not meant to be a kind of cookie cutter kind of approach to things, but it's about trying to know what the process is going to be. But it's a process of I like to think about it as cyclical in nature. We start with, we make a full circle and we come back, and then, but we don't close the circle. The circle opens with a higher level of awareness, and then we cycle outwards and we increase our awareness and we continue cycling outwards, because that's what the relational process ought to be. It's a process that we go, and every time we go through the process, we hopefully will spiral outwards. Um, Although in a cyclical manner, we're going to spiral outwards with greater levels of awareness about our capacity to become relational, ethical relational leaders. So it doesn't mean that we expect you to go through the process once and become this great leader. No, the expectation is that it's going to be an ongoing learning process where we learn from our mistakes and we learn from others. We get to know ourselves better and we improve. So it's not a one and done deal. It's about doing it over and over and over and getting ourselves, let's see if we running into right, making meaning. You all can go through the rest of these things here. Group activities. So this is something that you'll be looking at. Cooperation and collaboration. All of these are part and parcels of the process that they keep on talking about. Redefining paradigms. So cooperation and competition, right? Cool. Just trying to make sure the key issues coming up with this, because you all will have to kind of go through this. Meaning making. All right, so that means what you're talking about. You want what you have to say to mean things to people. So it means that your experiences need to be meaningful. It can't be shallow things. Then let's put it this way: the issues that we're going to face in this course are going to speak to things that matter, and they're going to matter to you, and they matter to other people, and in fact, they matter a lot to the people around us and our society, because if we don't put value on this developmental process that we're trying to engage in here, is likely to never have a positive impact upon the society that we're talking about. So this is what the meaning making. You get the information, well, not the information, but the data, organize the data into information, develop your skills and knowledge. From that knowledge, develop understanding, process through again, create the wisdom, and it translates into thought and action. This is why I always speak about it as being cyclical in nature, but spiraling more than cyclical, because every time we go through the process, it spirals outward because we increase our awareness, we increase the information, we increase the amount of knowledge and understanding and our wisdom and thought. So we get better as we do it more often. Meaning making. All right. All right. Meaning making is the process of arranging our understanding of experience so that we can know what has happened and what is happening, and so we can predict what will happen. It sounds a little repetitive. It's constructing knowledge of ourselves and the world. So the process that we're talking about here is one of a private journey. It's not something that is going to be for the whole world to see. but it impacts upon how you engage with everybody around you when you do it, and people will be able to see that change taking place in you. All right, and you should be able to influence people. So making meaning means that it matters to you and it matters to the people with whom you're engaging with. All right, so there's a whole section on meaning. Again, reflection and contemplation. I cannot emphasize this any more than it is in the thing. Reflection is a critical part of the whole process. That's one of the reasons why this course is built around a lot of reflection and contemplation. You're going to be writing a lot of reflection from your own self-analysis. That's reflection on your life. The midterm project is something that you're going to be reflecting on, specifically on different aspects of the thing. Everything you're going to be doing is reflection based. And it's because we need to engage in this on a regular basis to be able to develop the skills necessary, and it's therefore part of the process that is required. Because again, every time you go through the process, you cycle back, you reflect, and it impacts upon our decisions. We widen our concepts and our perception. We get better and better doing things that about. All right, so the reflection and contemplation is critical, and we have to do it in a meaningful manner. It can't just be hairy-fairy. Oh, I wonder what happened there. No, it has to be done in a strategic manner. We have to think about what we're doing. We have to. I encourage people to write journals and try and get it. Look at this guidelines here: retreat, renewal, return. Again, that whole repetition of things and coming back again and coming forward and coming back. They used to that was actually kind of popular in organizations in the latter part of the 90s and 2000s, where organizations and departments will go on retreat exercises. Don't know, any of you all ever did that with your companies or organizations to go and do reflection? No? All right, so well, I didn't get to kind of complete all of this, but it's time that you guys will, next week, we have the first two groups that are going to be presenting. Let me see. First two groups that are presenting next week would be Charles and Pitilal and Daniel and Ram Sahai. Are you guys here? Right. I spoke to some of you earlier, and everybody says they're okay in terms of where they're going. Everybody's okay so far, right? Yes? No? All right, so we're looking forward to some good presentations next week. All right, so if that's the case, I'm going to stop the recording and we will call it Jorge for the evening. All right, guys?